If you're looking for what I'm writing, you'll find it in Nehemiah 10 and verse 39. I don't want you to think that I am anywhere done with the 9th chapter, because I'm not. Just that this text needs to be applied to our hearts individually and then corporately. You know, most of the messages that I have delivered over these many years, when I use a subject like the church or the Lord's house or the house of our God, something like that, will conjure up the New Testament concept of the church, which is that Greek word written many times, ecclesia, the out-called ones, if you want to put it that way, to repeat Dr. Scott's, but simply those that have been called out. That is the concept of the church, those that have been called out. Yes, there was a caller that would go to call the people to worship, but the concept of Jesus saying, I will build my ecclesia, my out-called ones. So we've constantly used this concept, and it remains as such, that the people are the church. The church is not a building. And there's a paradox. There is the need for assembling, for coming together. Otherwise, it makes no sense for Paul to write and say that God gave some gift ministers to the church in prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. And all of these have to do with the Word of God. It would make no sense if there wasn't a place for people to gather. And the concept and purpose there is that all of those people come to the unity of the faith. It's for the perfecting, the bringing to completion of the saints, until we all come to the unity of faith, to understand, to come to know, to come to grow into that perfect man, Jesus Christ. So when I've spoken about the church, it has been in that capacity. Now I'd like you to take a look, because we haven't gone into the 10th chapter. So I've given you the text that I'm going to use, but I'd like you to flip back into the 9th chapter, and we were still looking at this, because otherwise the 10th chapter doesn't make sense. So I'm going to take a run at going backwards and doing an overview, because what the 9th chapter does, the 9th chapter is the beginning of a prayer. And this prayer begins with praise to God, creation, the choosing of Abraham, the calling him out of Ur, jumps immediately from Ur of Chaldees to pointing to the land, Canaan, the promised land, and really has to deal with God delivering his fidelity and delivering his people, bringing them out of bondage, bringing them through the Red Sea, bringing them through and providing for them manna and quail and water from the rock, and making sure that they had enough. And part of this passage says that for 40 years, God sustained them. They lacked nothing in the wilderness. If you can imagine, their clothes waxed not old, their feet didn't swell. For 40 years, God took care of these people. This is all part of a prayer that's kind of a collective, as I've called it, a mosaic of Scripture, just being poured out in reflection of God's faithfulness, of God's grace. One of the messages we looked at here, that God is a God of forgivenesses. And think about how many times the people, the children of Israel, slipped back and fell away from following God, and yet he still, when they cried out to him, he heard their cries and he came to them and delivered them. So this whole passage is dealing with the goodness of God, how he multiplied, gave them children as the stars of heaven. And if you keep going, it brings you to the time when Joshua entered the promised land. That begins at about verse 24, 25. This is a chronicle of the history in the 9th chapter. And then into the 27th and 28th, we're already into the book of Judges, if you're trying to parallel what's going on here in this 9th chapter. And it basically would bring you right to the time where they were. And the plea and the lament is, we're back here now in the land that was promised to us. We have the temple being rebuilt behind us, the walls that we built, the repopulation, the reading of the law. This is a great time of celebration, and yet there's only one problem. And the one problem is all of this is terrible because we don't own our land, and essentially we don't own ourselves, because they were still, although they returned, they were still under the rule of another empire. They still were not their own people. They were still not freed people, even though they came out of captivity. If you read very carefully, it says here, behold, verse 36, we are servants this day, and for the land that thou gavest unto our fathers to eat the fruit thereof, and the good thereof, behold, we are servants in it. And it yieldeth much increase unto the kings whom thou hast set over us, because of our sins. Also they have dominion over our bodies, over our cattle, at their pleasure. And we are in great distress. So here's a people so close to being emancipated completely, and yet it's almost like the proverbial brass ring just out of reach, because they're still under another person's king's control. Now, the division here is terrible, because chapter 9 ends with verse 38, and really probably verse 38 should begin, if we were going to do this properly, verse 38 should begin the first verse of chapter 10. It's an explanation. Because of all this, we make a sure covenant and write it, and our princes, Levites, priests seal unto it. Now, those that sealed it, so you can understand the flow. And here begins a list of people who signed a form of a covenant. Now, you might say, why on earth would they sign a covenant? But if you keep reading now, which brings us into the 10th chapter, and there's a whole list of people who are making an oath to obedience. And the reality is that these people, at this very moment, they know their state, and they so desperately want to serve and please God. Now, I'm going to break this into reading it as it occurs in the Old Testament. We're going to break apart my verse to get a better understanding of something that's right in that text. And then we're going to look at the whole chapter to see, maybe we get so hung up in thinking we're so far removed from these people, but we are not. No, we're not under the law. We're under grace by Jesus Christ. The law was a schoolmaster until faith came, and once faith has come, the law served its purpose to bring us, if you will, to Christ. And now we are free, as John says, because of the Son. So what we have here is a list of people who agree to this oath of obedience, a covenant. And I'm going to start reading at verse 28. And the rest of the people, the priests, the Levites, the porters, the singers, the Nethinims, that's another word for the servants, and all they that had separated themselves from the people of the lands unto the law of God, their wives, their sons, their daughters, everyone having knowledge and having understanding. That word for understanding, being. So if you were here many messages back, that's a pretty important Hebrew word right there. You'll have to get the messages from the bookstore or something, or watch it on the network. They clave to their brethren, their nobles, and entered into a curse and into an oath to walk in God's law, which was given by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe and to do all the commandments of the Lord, our Lord, and his judgments and his statutes. Now here begins an interesting part. We're no longer in the prayer. The people have prayed. Now here comes this covenant. And that we would not give our daughters unto the people of the land, nor take their daughters for our sons. And if the people of the land bring ware or any victuals on the Sabbath day to sell, that we would not buy it of them on the Sabbath or the holy day, that we would leave the 7th year and the exaction of every debt. Also we made ordinances for us, and the rest of this begins what we will look at in the last part of the message today as certain responsibilities that these people understood, and not grudgingly at this point. Now, the tragedy with all of this is that here were people gathered to rebuild, they overcame, they celebrated a victory. Ezra comes, he reads the law, people are weeping. They are gripped with godly sorrow. They have turned looking unto God. And at this point, after this petition, this prayer in the 9th chapter, these people are saying, we will do this thing. We will keep God's word. We will do this because we desire to please God. We don't want to be like our forefathers who drifted away and who left God. Not to think that everything's perfect here, because this book that only has 13 chapters, and we're looking at the 10th, but in the last chapter of this book, Nehemiah, who will have returned back to his official post, wherever he came from, whatever king he was serving under, will come back and return to Jerusalem only to find that the house of God once again is in disrespect and disrepair, that people are doing all, even though this, what we're just discussing in the 10th chapter, is the moment where you'd pray. It's like the moment you would pray that everyone would come to their senses and say, oh my God, and make a bold declaration, and we will not forsake the house of our God. And if you look carefully, we'll get to it eventually, the last chapter tells you that they completely abandon that resolution right there, and we will not forsake the house of our God. So is there anything that we can learn? Is there anything that we can, it's a rhetorical question. Surely there's many things we can learn out of this that are self-evident. They're axiomatic. We don't have to make it more difficult, which is the reality is, how many people have made a vow? Forget about a New Year's Eve resolution. Forget about things how many have made a vow? Please don't raise your hand. I don't want to see it. But how many have made a vow to God to be more faithful, to pray more, to be more diligent, to study more, to be more disciplined? And I said, don't raise your hand. And then you know over time that somehow that vow, whether it be by the power of the devil or by the power of laziness or the spirit of tiredness or I just don't have time. But that's the way we are. So I want us to look carefully, before I pick apart the rest of this chapter, I want us to look carefully at something. I want us first to look at this verse, because this verse is unfolded in the whole chapter. Let's look first at this statement, the house of our God. Whose house? Of our God. And this is, you might think this is very elementary, but this is part of the problem with the church today. If you trace back this word, house of our God, through the Bible, you see it's rather interesting. God didn't erect a structure. He brings Jacob to a place and he puts his head down on that rock for a pillow in Genesis 28, I believe, and he falls asleep and he sees the vision of the angels going up and down the ladder, and this surely was God descending and speaking to him and telling him, and when he wakes up he says, surely the Lord was in this place and I knew it not, and he called the place Bethel, which means house of God. At diverse times, that's in Genesis. At diverse times, God revealed himself, and the purpose of Bethel is very clear. God deigned to, even then, with Jacob, commune with him, give him a sense of comfort, instruction. The presence of God was there. As you move through the Bible, house of God becomes very clear when God gives the instructions to Moses and he says, you build me a tabernacle. And the book of Hebrews re-emphasizes, see to it that you build it exactly according to the pattern which I showed you on the mount. And as we looked at last week, God puts his spirit inside the builders to build a house which then later on will be called, of many things, the tent of meeting, the tabernacle. But in Exodus it says God says, build me a sanctuary that I may dwell there. Did God really need a place to dwell? Did he really need one when he was in the cloud and he was in the pillar of cloud and smoke and fire? Did he really need a residence, an official Pennsylvania address? But he said, build it. And this is the place where man and God will meet. And not man's way, but God's way. It's very interesting. House of God, through the book, you find interesting dimensions of what this meant, but they all come to the same place. Then there's the tabernacle, the temple. And Solomon builds the temple, and God did not ask for Solomon to build the temple, but he builds it, and nevertheless what's so beautiful is that the Lord's presence, his glory, descends in the temple, that the priest couldn't even go in because the glory, the Shekinah glory, filled the temple. And God's presence was there. So every single time we have the idea of God meeting man, of God's presence taking up a place and being in communion with man, even if it meant that certain people would be exposed and other people not. But by the way, if I may just add this in, this place was the meeting of Jacob, who essentially is and becomes Israel, and out of him the house of Israel. And from that, the people, the community of Israel, will travel around, and the tabernacle will be in the middle of the community, if you will. So no matter what, here's a great observation. The house of God, as it pertained to the tabernacle, moved with the people as the camp moved. But no matter where they went, the house of God, the tabernacle, was right smack dab in the middle of the community, which means no matter where you went, if you wanted to find the center of all things, it pointed to God. It pointed to worship and communion and service to God. Try that on for size when we compare the modern church, which instead of having God right at the center of things, God may be somewhere. This is why if you read in the book of Revelation, we have Jesus knocking at the door, which some numbnuts have translated as Jesus wanting to come into the church because he's standing there begging for you to let him in, when in fact what it is the church in the last days that has locked Christ out, and he's standing outside wondering, is anybody going to open the door? Not because he wants to come in to save you, because he's been shut out. Until people understand, this is what has good bearing. When you look at these lessons from the Old Testament, don't get trapped into thinking, well, that's the Old Testament, I can't glean from that, because you can. People who were part of the community, all of the tribes, they had their set place and their established place to be, but the camp, the tabernacle, was always in that set place, no matter what happened. That means at the center of the community, there was the presence of God and the worship to God that went on no matter what. And can you imagine the children of Israel saying, we set up our tent the way we're supposed to, but I'm not feeling this whole God thing today. Even though it's my time to go and make a sin offering, I'm not feeling it. So we're going to stay and play with some sand here and maybe play with some camel droppings while you guys go to church. Well, they don't have video games. They don't have smartphones. They can probably play with some camel stuff back there. I don't know. Camel ball. But can you imagine that? Well, only in our culture, because we are, and I say only in our culture because we've become so spoiled that we can't figure out that the center focus never stopped being God. If you look at the layout of every single town that was built in the formation of the important principal towns in each state as it grew, the church was always in the center of the city. People could come to the center. It was designed that way, to bring people to God, to the heart. Anywhere you went, you found your direction by where the church was situated. It all had a purpose. Today, who cares? Doesn't matter. And the temple, The temple became that stationary place where the people would bring their offerings, they would bring their sacrifices, they would bring what was prescribed in the law. And what is terribly tragic about the house of our God is the house of our God, Jesus said, became a den of thieves. In Jesus' day, people were in the temple. But they were in the temple performing and going through the motions. But the hearts of the people were far away from God, because had their hearts been towards God, they would have seen Christ and recognized, this is the Son of God. This indeed is the Messiah who has come to save his people from their sin. They couldn't recognize him. It says, he came to his own received him not. So we've got a concept of the house of God. And if you want to move even further into this, we might say the house of our God, which in the New Testament realm, when Jesus said, I'll build my church, my ecclesia, my outcalled ones, is in man. We become the house of our God by being the house of faith. You're not your own, you're bought with a price. Corinthians says, ye are Christ's. That doesn't mean you are God's. You are, or belong to God. You are belonging to Christ, bought with his blood. Habitation of faith. And if you want to take it one step further, John 14:2, Jesus says, in my Father's house are many mansions. And he's talking about the place that he's going to be going to, where he's going to prepare a place for them, which is being referred to as heaven. And we'll put here / kingdom, not on earth, but heaven. Again, so the concept is what he's established. I'm not really interested right now to make my point in these two last examples, in man or in heaven. I'm interested in what's going on earth for a reason. Because back there in my text, and we will not forsake the house of our God, there are certain things that we can know. First of all, God as the proprietor. That's why I asked the question, whose house? God's. And this again brings me back to something that seems rather plain and simple. If God is indeed the proprietor, and we like to quote the scripture from the Psalms, except the Lord build his house, they that labor to build it build in vain. But as proprietor, he says, I will build my church. It's his. The disconnect is, if it's his church and we are his, then the idea should be we are surrendered to him. He indeed is king with a kingdom. Why do we pray? Let me ask you something. Why do people, they say, what do you recommend I pray? I pray what people call the Lord's Prayer, which is really the disciples' prayer. And it begins with our Father, and it says, thy will be done. Thy will. Lord, why pray that prayer? Thy will be done if you're not willing to know about what thy will is. Not only not willing to know what it is, not willing. Oh, that's great. It's a great prayer. Well, what the hell does that mean? It's got to mean something. This is why the Bible cautions against vain repetitions. You really want his will on earth? Don't answer. So God is proprietor. You can equally look at that and say the house of our God as the dwelling place of God, which I covered already. Blessed are they that dwell in thine house. Those that are coming into the house and are not just, it's like, please try and get why this is so frustrating for me, because I'm looking at from Bethel to the temple in Christ's day, and I'm looking at the mindset, and I'm thinking to myself, does anybody connect with the idea that we are very disconnected from what it means to dwell in God's house, apart from being the habitation of God? Why do churches struggle so much to get people, and this is not just a faith center struggle, it's everywhere, to get people to be faithful, to get people to be committed. If you're going to commit something, commit to being faithful to serving God. Be committed to something and then stick to it. But why is that so difficult? Because the church is no longer looking at This is the center. Remember what I said to you about the lighthouse? What good is the lighthouse if there's no light in it? What good is it? It's just a house. It won't prevent the one who's sailing to be a shipwreck or a disaster. It won't protect from anything because there's no light to guide. And what good is the lighthouse if it's not high enough and hoisted up? I'm speaking about the Word of God and Jesus Christ, not high enough for people to see. You know, we have this idea here, just preach a little sermon and every 2 minutes or every 10 minutes we'll say, amen, hallelujah, praise the Lord. Wow, that was spiritual, wasn't it? We're not talking about that. That's not even hoisting. Hoisting is you stand in a place where, and I'm speaking first of me because that's my responsibility, to lift up the banner of Christ and to say, this is the salve for the disease of mankind. Look unto the light, you who are in darkness. Look unto the one who is lifted up and understand he is the salvation of your souls. He is life eternal. So when I look at this front and center message, the dwelling place of God, I also look at the house of our God as the words that are conjured up, family and householder. And how many parables did Jesus reference? There was a certain householder. House of God, same thing. And also what conjures up here is the concept, the house of God in the kingdom. Ephesians 2, don't turn there. I want you to stay in Nehemiah. I'll read it to you. Ephesians 2 says very plainly, now therefore ye are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God. You got that concept right there. And are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom all the building fitly framed together groweth into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom ye are also builded together for an habitation of God through the Spirit. So, when I look at all of this first part of this, house of our God, it tells me several things, as I mentioned. God is proprietor, the dwelling place, the family or householder concept, dynasty, or kingdom. That's the first place I want you to look. The second place I want you to look is the house of our God and its design. Because see, I cannot get to this before we get to the design. Now, I'm not talking about the shape of the building or the size of the platform. It's design. That's where we got to go back into the text. The text will help us to note what type of a design this is. So, back in Nehemiah, at verse 30, it says, and that we would not give our daughters unto the people of the land, nor take their daughters for our sons. Now, I want you to make a note somewhere. Because some of you will read this and say, well, we don't do that. We don't have to worry about that. Verses 29 and 30. Put beside those verses his will. We're talking about the house of our God and the design. So here these people were concerned with not giving their daughters unto the people of the land or taking daughters for our sons. And you might say, yes, that's an Old Testament concept. I want you to realize something. There was scriptural basis for this instruction. The first one is that God is concerned with his covenant people and their faith, and all you had to know, if you didn't know any more, was recognize that God wasn't saying, hey, I'm not liking this race to be with that race. What God was saying was, I want you to think about how often we've read the apostasy, the falling away of people because they got involved with other people who weren't worshiping the same God. Now, we'll talk about, forget about Samson. He just had bad taste with Delilah and he was a little bit hard-headed. But let's talk about Solomon. And Solomon gets the wisdom, builds the house, has incredible riches, and his downfall isn't that he refuses to have worship or pray. His demise is women. And those foreign women led his heart astray, so that as many women as he had, they worshipped Ashtaroth, and they worshipped everything under the sun except for the living God. And where the heart is, or other things. And that's what lured him away. You can look at Ahab's union with Jezebel, who the terrible consequences because she worshiped Baal. And whether Ahab started off good or bad, it doesn't matter. It still ended up that Baal worship won out. So there's that reason right there. Now, are there exceptions? Yes, but they're very few. One of them is the Moabitess Ruth. She turns from the God she worshiped to say, my God will be, your God will be my God. And she never looked back. She turned and she never looked back. There are exceptions. So when these people are saying, we will not give our daughters to the people of the land, we will not take their daughters for our sons, I want you to think about it along the lines of his will. Not so much about what was being required. Don't commingle, don't be unequally yoked. But what was at the fundamental point of this? His will. We could go on to make an equally good case that to protect the line descending to Christ, because no one may have known. Every mother thought when babies were being born at the time that Christ was born, every mother in Jerusalem thought she was giving birth to the Savior. Never mind. So instead of trying to get too much involved with the meat of what's there, I want you to just label that his will. And his will, I started off earlier saying his will today is very simple. That people come to the faith, not faith in faith, not just simply believing, but they come to the faith in Jesus Christ to know who he is. That's why I quote John 17:11 so often. That's Jesus' high priestly prayer. And he says that they may know thee. It's frustrating sometimes. I think, what part of this do people not understand? That we might come to know his will today is to have faith and trust him. Now, if God did all of this that he said he would do in the Old Testament, and he's got a couple of things to yet do and fulfill, but he wants us to trust him. And the criteria for his will today, when we pray and we say, thy will be done, Pastor, how can I know God's will? Can you help me find God's will? Well, the last time I checked, I haven't seen you exhausting the pages of this first. Before you get a word about God's will for your personal direction, you need to read the will of his direction to you first. You won't know anything more than the things that people subjectively might plant in your head, which isn't knowing the will of God for your life until you know his will. That means reading this book. You don't have to be a hermit or a monk or a sister or somebody that never comes up for air. But do have to learn his word to know his will. So let's just put that down right there. That's one. We're talking about the design of the house of God. Remember that. Number two, verse 31, and if the people of the land bring ware or any victuals on the Sabbath day to sell, that we would not buy it of them on the Sabbath or of a holy day. So let's put this down here right now. This is verse 31. And we'll put this down as his day. And I decided to include this because it's very important. In Nehemiah's day, the Sabbath needed to be kept and understood first. You have to remember, we don't have the concept of how the community might have worked, except to know that this keeping the Sabbath was first honoring God, and the demonstration of which is you'd be in a close community, you're passing by, you're seeing your neighbor, you're like this. You see everything. So whether you see your neighbor out there and he's busy chopping wood and going around selling it versus the one that is keeping the Lord's day. So it was first to honor God. There was secondly a reminder. The Sabbath was a stark and beautiful reminder at the same time that God created everything, and at the end of his creating, he rested. So if you're thinking about the Sabbath day that way, it would have pointed you back to remember the Lord. And lastly, the concept of rest. Unlike today's society where you can have a desk job, doesn't mean you don't work, but everybody who lived at that time did hard work. And when I say hard work, physical labor. There wasn't anybody sitting at a desk, a typewriter, a computer, anything like that. You worked. I mean, I'm not saying that's not work, but everything was physical labor, hard stuff. So a day of rest. So his day, and I could say today, bringing this into a concept, I've had people ask me, well, what day is the Sabbath day, or should I celebrate a day? Now, I tell you, I Sabbath daily. How's that? There's nothing to mess you up like a politically good answer. I Sabbath every day. That doesn't mean I rest every day. I remember God every day. I celebrate him every day. But there are some people that say, well, I can't do that just yet. I'm not ready for that because I have certain days, like the days that I work, and then Sunday is the NFL day. And maybe Monday night is the teachers' meeting night or the kids' soccer club night. So this is the stuff that I'm talking about. When you really take a reality check, some people will be offended if I said Sabbath and I didn't explain this, that we're so busy making excuses about what that sounds like. But the reality is our hearts and our minds are always constantly coming up with how to fill the time with all the other things we can do. And that's why I said I Sabbath daily. I don't need a special day. The day is when we gather together as a whole body together. I think that's awesome. To see the family of God in one place, to open up the Word, to learn together. But recognizing God on a daily basis, you can't beat that. I've got to speed this up because I'm running out of time. So, what else do we have? Verse 31 also has this, that we would leave the 7th year and the exaction of every debt. That's still verse 31. We'll put B, and we're going to put his way. Now, his way, because we're still talking about the design of the house of our God. In case you think that I've gone off somewhere, I'm still on track. The design of this, his way, in these verses, the 7th year, which was part of the laws prescribed in Leviticus about leaving the ground on the 7th year to rest, but it also required something else in his way. That was trusting God implicitly that on the 6th year, God would rain out an abundant harvest that would be sufficient in the 7th. And therefore, his way was to teach his people to trust him, that he would provide for them, that he would take care of them. If you kept this prescribed part of the law, I'll take care of the rest. I'll take care of you because you're doing it my way. So if you see, that's one. And then the second part of this is the exaction of every debt. His way, the 7th year, the cancellation of every debt. Now, I want you to think about that, because that's pretty profound. When people talk about, oh, the law, and the law this, and the law that. But God provided to show his love, to say in the 7th year, all debts are canceled. I wouldn't mind that. Some of you wouldn't mind that. Some of you are carrying around some hefty debts and loans, and wouldn't mind having my debts canceled in the 7th year. I've had a couple of 7th years, and that hasn't happened, but hey. But what I'm saying to you is that was his way with his people to say, I will extend my love and my mercy to show you and to teach you about loving and forgiving your neighbor, those who you owe, those to whom you are debtors or owe debts to. There's a little bit of forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And you no longer have to think, did God have to prescribe a 7th year? Because in that prayer, as he teaches his disciples, he's laying it out bare for them that this is something to do daily, sometimes hourly. So we've got his way. And then lastly, we'll move up to verse 32. Also, we made ordinances for us to charge ourselves yearly with the 3rd part of a shekel for the service of the house of our God. So here in verse 32, we have his work. So I want you to look at all these words, his will, his day, his work, his way, and his work. And the design of the house of our God was to make these things known, to teach them to the community, and to implement them. In the doing of that, in the old dispensation, God said, for this, I will bless you. Now, it sounds rather ridiculous, but the design of the house of our God is not the design of how you or I think it should have been, ought to be, or might be. But the design of the house of our God still is today, if you want to think about it this way. His will, His day, His way, and His work, and it should still be all about that. A church calling itself a house of God, void of Christ, or void of the Word of God, or void of Bible teaching, is an empty house, just a house. When the Spirit of God comes in and fills the hearts and minds of the people, you are the habitation of God individually and coming together corporately as the body called the church, which in the New Testament, Paul writing to Timothy in 3:15 says, the church which is pillar and ground of truth, house of God, church of Jesus Christ. So there's a principle here that I've put out, the design. Now let me move quickly to the last part of this, because the last part of this, His work, which I think I've outlined, but there's something about this that needs to be said. There are some subheadings under His work. They would fall under these things: systematic, organized, planned giving, proportionate giving, sacrifices. Now, all of these things are woven into the service of the house of our God, His work. Now, you may say, well, but you're quoting Old Testament, and how do I make an application today? And I'll tell you. And it should be self-evident by now where I'm going with this. God has never changed. In all the time that I've been talking to you, I've been saying virtually the same thing of you could go back and through the ages you could check, and God has been saying this. The last words out of the prophet Malachi to a disobedient people, return to me and I'll return to you. That's the last prophet of the Old Testament, still making a cry for people, God's people, to turn back to God's ways. So let's read this, because this is His work. As I said, systematic, proportionate, and sacrificial giving. People don't like to talk about this, but here's what these people did. It sounds like they imposed upon themselves, but in reality, the way the King James reads, it says, we also made ordinances for us to charge ourselves yearly with the third part of a shekel for the service of the house of our God. Let me ask you something. The edict from the king let them come back, and no doubt they had to have been subsidized. A lot of money was given for them to do and to accomplish and to build. There's no doubt about that. But after all that was done, and after all the hoopla of the altar and the temple and the walls and all the building is done, these are people who had to make the trek, who had to start over from scratch, and now the temple still must function. And there are clear outlines. Some of you are very familiar about what would go on. The showbread starts with the showbread. Showbread, which was from the people. If you remember in the Old Testament, when God rained down the manna, that manna that was collected, that then the people took and gave back, it was an offering to God. He starts first with that, the showbread, and the continual meat offering, and the continual burnt offering of the Sabbaths, new moons, set feasts, for the holy things, and for the sin offerings to make an atonement for Israel. That means the whole community and individually as well. So we're talking about a lot of required offerings, which requires a lot of giving. That's why I said systematically, proportionately, and sacrificially, all in this, all to His work. We cast lots among the priests, the Levites, the people, for the wood offering. And I'm sure there's that big question, well, I don't never remember reading about a wood offering anywhere. That's right. But these people had to come up with the wood to keep the continual fire going. You think about that. We're talking about whoever had to get the wood, go cut the wood, bring the wood. Somebody would have to keep offering the wood. There is no prescription in the law for that, by the way. There is no prescription for a wood offering. They understood they have to keep it going. That's why it's called a continual or perpetual offering. To bring it to the house of our God, after the houses of our fathers, at times appointed year by year, to burn upon the altar of our Lord, as it is written in the law, to bring the first fruits of our ground, the first fruits of all the fruits of all trees year by year into the house of the Lord, the firstborn of our cattle, of our children, of everything, first fruits of our dough, our offerings, fruit of all manner of trees, wine, oil, everything that you can imagine, and the tithes of our ground unto the Levites, that the same Levites might have the tithes in all the cities of our tillage. And the priest of the son of Aaron shall be with the Levites, when the Levites take tithes, and the Levite shall bring up the tithe of tithes unto the house. So the Levites got a portion, and they took off, and they gave a tithe of the tithes that were collected to them, so that there was nobody in the community that did not exercise giving, whether it be proportionately or sacrificially. And this is part of what I wish some of you would have listened to the festivals. It's part of the problem. There's a small contingent of people carrying this whole ministry, and then there's this outer circle of people who come, they listen, but they're not there having to carry the weight. And I think in the big picture, this lays out pretty clearly that the whole community was responsible. I've heard people say, but I don't have any money. And I've told you before, I've had people who say they don't have any money who are also homeless people who send in offerings. They'll go out deliberately to sell bottles if they have to say, I'm sending something, even if it's 50 cents, to say, I'm putting God first. You know, when a homeless person can do that, it makes me examine even myself. It makes me examine the spending that I do, the things that I may really not need to do, in order to make sure that I'm still putting God first. We've done that in the office. We've done that in the administration. We've done that everywhere to make sure that we're not being wasteful and putting money all over the place that we don't need to. You find the places that you can cut, that you can still do the things that you've committed to do, and God makes a way. And here we have, the priest, the son of Aaron, shall be with the Levites to take the tithes. They'll bring the tithe of the tithes into the house of our God, to the chambers, into the treasure house, into the storehouse. For the children of Israel and the children of Levi shall bring the offering of corn, new wine, oil into the chambers, where are the vessels of the sanctuary, and the priests that minister, and the porters, and the singers. And we will not forsake the house of our God. Now, I'm running out of time, but let's look at the front part of this. With all that being said, I just cataloged what these people, remember, they didn't have, through the captivity period, they didn't have somebody teaching them regularly about the law and about the ways of God, but when they heard it, they said, this is what we'll do. And suddenly, out of all this, preeminently what is a reality is God's word, God's way. Anything that pertains to God becomes front and center. So here's the resolution then about all those things front and center, and we will not forsake. Now it seems self-evident to me what this word forsake means. We will not leave it. One of the translations is to be slovenly, to be sloppy. The French, to abandon, to leave it. In many cases, there are so many examples in this book, and the greatest example is this. These people were walled away. They were in captivity. When the edict came for them to come back, very few returned. So you can be darn sure when somebody said, we will not forsake the house of our God, that was a vow from the heart. I'm sure they really meant it. Did it last? No. Oh, I just killed the whole message. It didn't. The reality is, it took only a little while when Nehemiah went away, and when he came back, the house was already in disrepair. The tithes weren't being brought. One part of the house was being used for someone who was an enemy, who's now staying inside the house where the offerings used to go. And when Nehemiah comes back, believe me, he's going to take some names and do some other stuff. But they made this pledge. And here's what's bothersome. Do you know if you search this book, you're going to find God pledging from Deuteronomy 4:31, Joshua, I can name off the people through the book where God said, I will not leave you, I will be with you, I will not forsake you, my presence shall go with you. Keep reading and you'll find that that was the promise to David. It was the promise to almost every single person who was brought where God said, I will be with you. To Moses, I will be with you. My presence will go with you. So to a God who's been so faithful to do all of this, it almost seems terrible that the people, even though it was in good faith, made a promise. We will not forsake the house of our God. What can we today glean from this? Let me just tell you. There's still people today that forsake the house of God. And it doesn't matter that I've just told you that this is the whole reason for the house of God to exist. Romans talks about the need for a person to be sent, to be called and sent. How will they hear except there be a preacher? This is the whole idea of what the church exists for. You don't come to church to be a Christian, but you come to church to hear faith being spoken into your ears, that more faith comes, because faith comes by hearing. That God, who did give gifts to his gift ministers, gives the ability to open up a passage. And how many letters have I received? Thank you for your honesty and your love in the last year to say, Pastor, I've read that for 20 years and I never saw that. That's not Melissa Scott. That's God and a gift that he gave to me. I can take no credit for. But that's what you come to church for. You come to church to make a testimony that God is still front and center in this community of faith. You come to church, and maybe the rest of the world will say, well, we went to Mass, and oh boy, it was really long. Some people come out because it's the holidays. But let me ask you this. How can the people that come into the church that say Jesus is my Lord and Savior and he washed and cleansed me with his shed blood, how can they say that? Know, at least in part, what the scripture says, you're not your own, you're bought with a price. Leave and be completely indifferent as to whether they ever come back or not, because the house of God has no more respect. And I told you that's why I said I'm not asking people to respect me. I'm asking you to respect the position and what I represent. I'm just a faulty container. But what I represent is God's word and bringing it to you, and for some of you, waking you up to the fact that this resolution that was made, this declaration, and we will not forsake, even these people who were ready, desiring, they still fell back. They still fell away. And don't think that somehow if we make this declaration, some resolution, it'll stick. The only time it sticks, my golly, you're going to say, wow, Pastor, you're repetitive. But the only time it sticks is when you abide in this word. And when you abide in this word, have some of you gotten that now? When you abide in this word abides in you, that is when you are not going to be departing, because you earnestly know that this is the spiritual nutrition that you need. So I'd like you to just quickly take a look with me at this resolution. It's an indication of spiritual life. It is an acceptance of a burden. It is a declaration of priority. It is acknowledging the importance of the house of God. And with all of this, some of you will leave here today and say, got it. I got all of that. I got all these things that you said. And I'm praying for some of you to realize this is so important. This is not Melissa Scott standing here saying, if you don't give money, we won't be on TV or we can't stay on the air. I've told you, that's God over the years that's made it so that you give and you do your part, and whatever we have, that's what we do with it. That's my business. That's my stewardship. No, the issue is I'm wanting this church to turn a corner, and that corner must be first and foremost putting God and God's house first. One of the first things I did in my position as pastor is I began cutting what I thought was wasteful fat and beginning to make repairs, which are still ongoing. And I said, God forbid, but if God should take me out, I want to make sure, God forbid, that I would not leave this church with a dime of debt and leave it so that if there's somebody that has to step into this pulpit, they won't be going, oh my God, where do I start? Because everything's such a mess. And I'm sorry to tell you, that has been my labor for all these years. That's the stewardship that I've practiced. And I'm not telling you do as I do, but when we put God front and center, the community of faith comes together to recognize the opportunities for God to work His will in your life, to demonstrate His power and His word come alive when the community says, this is what matters. All that other stuff out there will still be there. Neglecting this house and forsaking this house says, you'll get to it when you get to it. You know what God says about that attitude? You may not like this, but God is not a God, the God I serve anyway, that is saying, well, when you make time for me, and as much time you make for me, I'll make for you. He's looking at us as His children, thinking, what is wrong with some of these, that they cannot recognize my love and my care and be committed. Now, I am calling for you today. I know I've gone over my time, but it doesn't matter. This is important. I'm calling for you today to make a commitment. Some of you are here for the first time. Come back next week and give God a chance to see if the Word of God is not going to begin to spring up new life inside your heart. It doesn't happen in a day. It doesn't happen at the altar. It happens as you go saying, I need this Word of God and I need this church to be the house of God that I will not forsake. I won't leave it, like many have who are still out there feeling sorry for themselves, quick to draw back. The question Jesus asked of His disciples, will you also go? I'm not asking that question. I'm telling you I'm forging on. I am a person full of faith that says, I know what my God can do. My God can do anything. My God can fix the problems you made or you didn't make. My God can raise you up from shambles and put you on a place where your feet are solid. He can give you vision when you thought you wouldn't have any. He can give you a way where you thought there'd never be a way, because God couldn't possibly be listening to your little prayers. And I'm standing here to tell you, oh yes, He will. And oh yes, He can, because He's faithful. This whole book that I've been teaching out of represents God's fidelity. Would someone today have that courage to say, not only we will not forsake the house of God, but we will stand on God's fidelity and let some of that faith spill over onto you in your walk, in your life, and as you go, recognize God is in the mix. And whatever problems you have and whatever issues you have, God's going to take care of them. Why? Because He's faithful, and we will not forsake. Many others can. We will not forsake the house of our God called Faith Center. That's my message. I'm Pastor Melissa Scott, pastor of Faith Center, Glendale, California. I teach every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. If you'd like to attend services with us, simply call the 800 number, that is 800-338-3030, to join us. If you'd like to watch, listen, and learn 24 hours a day, simply log on to our website at www.pastormelissascott.com.